And welcome to a special edition of COS Live. I'm your host. I'm Rita Peters. I serve as the Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs with Convention of States Action, and this is another exciting day for us. In just a few moments, we are expecting a hearing and a vote from the South Carolina Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on our Convention of States Action resolution, which in South Carolina is House Bill 3205. Now, Mark Meckler is here in Columbia, standing by right now to give testimony in favor of our resolution. That legislation calls for an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments to the U.S. Constitution on three topics: fiscal restraints, term limits, and limits on federal scope and jurisdiction. 17 states have already passed the identical resolution, and this year it's being considered so far by an additional 21 states, including South Carolina. Along with Mark Meckler, a group of Convention of States supporters have gathered there in the Capitol in South Carolina to witness these proceedings. So let's back up and talk about how we got here. After passing through the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Constitutional Laws by a vote of 3-2, and then passing through the full House Judiciary Committee by a vote of 14-8, the South Carolina House overwhelmingly approved our resolution by a vote of 66-42 last year. So that was 2021. South Carolina has a 2-year session, so now we just need to make it through the Senate side to get it done this year in the Palmetto State. The South Carolina team, which was named the Convention of States Team of the Year in 2020, has been super busy building support across the state in the legislature. Over 45,000 South Carolinians have signed the Convention of States petition. Additionally, a scientific survey revealed that 2/3 of South Carolina voters are in favor of an Article 5 Convention of States. South Carolina voters disapprove of the U.S. Congress by 83%, with only a 10% approval rating. By a nearly 3-1 margin, South Carolina voters favor limiting federal spending, and nearly 80% of South Carolina voters favor term limits for the U.S. Congress and federal judges. The COS South Carolina volunteer team, again, was named the 2020 Team of the Year, and for good reason. They earned the official support of both the Republican Party of South Carolina and the Libertarian Party of South Carolina. They have also recruited many high-profile endorsers who represent South Carolina, some of those representing the state in Washington, D.C., including Congressman Jeff Duncan, Congressman Ralph Norman, and Congressman William Timmons. Former U.S. Senator Jim DeMint of South Carolina is also an endorser. The South Carolina team has been so busy, and they have just done amazing work there. They've sent hundreds of handwritten letters from citizen volunteers to their legislators, and also developed a truly impressive list of legislative co-sponsors. Now, if there is a successful vote today in the subcommittee, the resolution would still need to go through the full committee, and then it would get sent to the full Senate for final passage in South Carolina. So, will the Palmetto State become state number 18? I don't know, but today is an important step in that process. Now, we're going to go ahead and take you to the committee room where our grassroots have gathered and let you just watch the proceedings right along with them. They should be starting any minute now. Stay tuned.
I would tell you that this is, in my belief, one of the most important votes you'll ever take. Now, some of you think that's just plain old hyperbole. I get it, but I really do. Because if we stop thinking like Republicans and Democrats, we really can be statesmen and state persons. Because this is about America. This is about not a red and blue issue. This is a red, white, and blue issue. This is about our America. We have a behemoth federal government, one that we can barely imagine, even in my young age. But growing up in the 50s and the 60s, it was never this large. It was just a little federal government. But now it's enormous. Washington is totally out of control. No one's going to deny that. Well, if you do, you're not watching the news. Washington is out of control, completely dysfunctional. We don't have three equal branches of government. They're at war with each other. We have a structural problem, though, and the structural problem is this between the states and the federal government. We states are the parent. We created the federal government. They're the child. Oops, got turned upside down there along the way. And now they are the overarching parent running for everything. You have the power to fix Washington, D.C. You do. You have the power to fix this because the founders gave you that power. You know their intent was to have very strong state legislatures. They respected the cultures of each of the states because they didn't all get along back then at all. They were very prideful of their states. So they wanted the state legislatures to be very powerful, if you want to use the word power, but to be in charge. Because why? We're actually the closest to the real people. We go home at night most nights. In the weekends, we're at home. We see them in the grocery store. They've got our cell phone number. They could come knock on the door. I mean, we're there. Try that with the federal government and see how it's working. Our founders gave us a magnificent document in the Constitution, but now we see partisan warfare. Congress's abysmal rating.
If I can have your attention, I'm going to call this subcommittee meeting to order. And we have several bills on the agenda dealing with an Article 5 Convention of States, which is a process that's in Article 5 of the Constitution that enables a amendment to the Constitution a proposed amendment to originate and be enacted by the states. And the framers put two methods: one, Congress initiating amendments, and the states initiating amendments. And so we have to leave this room at 11:30, and at 12:30, and we will reconvene 30 minutes after adjournment if we don't get through the testimony by then. And so I would like those, when they do testify, to keep it brief, try to keep it within 2 minutes, because we have a lot of people. And I would like to recognize Representative Bill Taylor, who authored the House bill. Would you like to address the subcommittee, Representative Taylor? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members. I will be brief, which is a blessing. 3205. In my view, it's one of the most important pieces of legislation you'll ever entertain, because we are at a crisis point in this country. We didn't get here just in the last few years. We got here over the last many decades. Washington is bloated, out of control, and we have the right and the ability, thanks to the Constitution and our founders in Article 5, to put a stop to it. It's the legal and lawful way to go about all of this. So, and no lecture on federalism, but we state legislators and state legislatures are supposed to be the ones that are most powerful. We gave birth to the federal government. We are the parent, they are the child. And it's gotten turned around and upside down, and they're out of control, and they don't seem to want to control themselves. This isn't a red and blue issue, as some people like to make it out to be. It's a red, white, and blue issue. This isn't about Republicans and Democrats. They're all guilty up there. They're all guilty of doing all of these things to expand the federal government and encroach upon our liberty. One of the things you may hear, and about the only thing the opposition can come up with is, well, we don't want a con-con, as they like to call it, that's their made-up term. We don't like that because you're going to tear up the Second Amendment. You're going to do all of these things. Well, that's just all these nonsense. If you will, an amending convention of the states can only propose amendments to the Constitution. Propose it. We have a constitutional convention underway right now. It's called Congress. On an average session, they'll have 75 different proposed amendments. Well, none of them gets any real traction. But the math is on the side. So if a convention of states can only offer and propose amendments, once we have 34 states, then Congress calls this, then it takes 38 states to ratify. We couldn't even ratify the ERA. So here's the math that I kind of like. If you have 38 states, that's 76 legislative bodies that have to agree. In the House and the Senate, except for one, unicameral, but 76. That's a high jump bar. Heck, we can't even find agreement around this joint on a lot of things that are very important to us. So 76 legislative bodies in this nation have to come together and say they agree without amending anything. So I think that's the ultimate safety valve. In other words, 13 states have veto power over anything that would be proposed. And I don't foresee anything nutty coming out of a proposed amendments out of a convention like this. So I have no fears because the math is on our side. Again, I just look at us. We have a hard time agreeing on stuff right here. So let alone 76 different legislative bodies. I would hope that you would, I know you know a lot about this, carefully consider it and pass and move this forward. We did it in the House. It took 7 years to get this bill through the House of Representatives. Hopefully it won't take 7 years in your side, your body. We can do this rather rapidly. We will be the 18th state. 2 other states just recently, in the last week or two, have passed this. So we'll be the 18th state. We're more than halfway there to the 34. Thank you, Senators, very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Taylor? Thank you, sir. Okay. Next is Michael Simmons. Would you like to speak, Michael Simmons? Michelle, you signed up for your wife to speak?
I think Vicki Simmons.
Oh, Vicki Simmons, okay.
Office to uphold the Constitution of the United States are not upholding it. But instead of looking at the behavior of elected officials, Convention of States advocates want to change the Constitution itself by adding amendments. Do you realize that everything the Convention of States advocates want is already covered in the Constitution itself, and that there's absolutely no need to go to a convention or to add amendments? COS, that is Convention of States Advocates, want to impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, but the Constitution clearly enumerates the powers of the legislative branch in Article 1, Section 8. The federal government has gotten permission from many states for their unconstitutional spending by offering them taxpayer money with terms and conditions attached. How much of South Carolina's budget comes from federal funds, and how did each state legislator vote on the appropriations bill last year? COS advocates want to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, but the Constitution clearly lists the power and jurisdiction of the federal legislature in Article 1, the executive branch in Article 2, and the judicial branch in Article 3. COS advocates want to limit the terms of office for its officials and the members of the Congress, but the Articles of Confederation, which preceded the Constitution, were replaced in part to fix the terms and conditions, gutted that document, and replaced it with the Constitution of the United States. What about a replacement constitution? One of the speakers is going to be showing you a replacement constitution that was written, at least co-authored, by a Convention of States Legal Advisory Board member. All right? You got a situation with respect to the Constitution of the United States. When I gave a pocket copy of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution to my SC House member yesterday, I happened to engage briefly in a conversation with Representative Bill Taylor, and he gave me to understand that the math is settled. Well, the thing is, we're not just talking about the math within these walls. Okay, we have an idea based upon the U.S. representatives and the U.S. senators' lifetime track record of voting in line with the Constitution. District 1, Representative Nancy Mace, 90%. District 2, Representative Joe Wilson, 59%. District 3, Representative Jeff Duncan, 80%. District 4, Representative William Timmons, 77%. District 5, Representative Ralph Norman, 81%. District 6, Representative James Clyburn, 19%.
Ms. Simmons, could you wind it up? Because that we're beyond the 2 minutes.
Thank you. If one were to average all these percentages for all 7 districts and the senators Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott by the 9 people who were to represent South Carolina and Washington, D.C., we would see that they have, over their lifetime of service, voted in keeping with the Constitution about 66% of the time. By academic grading standards, that is a failing score. That's the math that should concern you. We need to use the power that you already have within your disposal, which is Article 6, nullification. You tell representatives and senators in Washington, D.C., if there's something that you don't want, you nullify it here. Do you have any questions?
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Carl Rebenacher. I probably mispronounced that. Oh, you want to speak as well? Yes. Okay, well, Michael Simmons, I thought you deferred to your wife. I'm sorry.
Good morning, honorable senators. My name is Michael Simons. I live in Aiken County. The late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia understood the danger of a constitutional convention. While he voiced support for one at a 1979 event, the justice had reversed his opinion by 2014 due to the uncertainty of what would come out of it. In 2015, Scalia reiterated his opposition to an Article 5 convention, stating, "This is not a good century to write a constitution." In 1979, then U.S. Senator Barry Goldwater, Republican from Arizona, correctly warned about a convention. He stated, quote, "If we hold a constitutional convention, every group in the country, majority, minority, middle of the road, left, right, up, down, is going to get its 2 bits in, and we're going to wind up with a constitution that will be so far different from the one we have lived under for 200 years that I doubt the republic could continue." Here's more cause for concern. A legal advisory board member of Convention of States has co-authored a model conservative constitution for the Constitution Center Constitution Drafting Project as a replacement for our present document, potentially to be adopted at any Constitution Convention, or as advocates prefer to call it, a Convention of States. That board member is Robert P. George, a supposed conservative who is a member of the Globalist Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. The main goal of the CFR, according to a former member, is promoting the disarmament of U.S. sovereignty and national independence and submergence into an all-powerful one-world government. A constitutional convention is unnecessary to protect individual liberty and limit the size and scope of government. The massive expansion of government and growing infringements on our liberties is not because of problems or flaws with the Constitution, but rather due to misinterpretation, wrongful application, or lack of enforcement altogether. If applied faithfully and accurately in accordance with its original meaning, at least 80% of the federal government's programs would likely be found unconstitutional. Rather than passing an Article 5 convention application which seeks a runaway convention that would threaten our individual freedoms, the legislature should nullify unconstitutional laws under Article 6, part of which states, "This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land." This implies that laws not made in accordance with the Constitution are null and void. The 10th Amendment says that all powers not granted by the Constitution to the federal government
Mr. Simmons,
are reserved to the states and
you're
people.
at 2 minutes. Could you wind it up?
Yes, sir. By enforcing this important constitutional provision alone, the states can push back a significant amount of federal overreach. I strongly urge you to oppose all Convention of States, Article 5 Convention, and Constitutional Convention resolutions. Use nullification as a safe and constitutional means to limit government, and rescind any and all previously passed Article 5 Convention applications. Do you have any questions?
Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Senator from Orangeburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Simons, do you believe that a constitutional convention could actually write its own rules?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that?
Yes, sir. Anything is possible, because when you look in Article 5, there are no rules. What could happen? We don't know.
Do you believe also that a constitutional convention could set its own agenda, possibly influenced by powerful interest groups?
Yes, sir, I do. I believe it is entirely possible.
Do you believe, sir, that a convention could choose a new ratification process?
Yes, sir, I do.
And do you believe, sir, that no other body, including courts, could actually clear the authority over a convention?
Yes, sir, I think it's entirely possible. We don't know what could happen. Seriously.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Next
sir.
is Carl Rebenacher. Is he here? Okay. Bill Taylor. Natalie Traver.
Good morning. My name is Natalie Traver, and I am 14 years old. I have come here today to make it loud and clear that I do not agree with what the federal government is doing. They have caused America to be almost $30 trillion in debt. They continue to restrict our constitutional right to bear arms. They have stolen the value of our hard-earned dollars by spending money uncontrollably, and they have attempted to force us into their way of life at every turn. We need to fight it. The government has grown very powerful. There are few things that we can do to fight back in a peaceful way. I believe that there are many good people who want to do something to help, but don't know what they can do. Short of running for election, what can we do to prevent the federal government from destroying our country? The answer is Convention of States. By establishing term limits, requiring a balanced budget, and restraining federal government overreach, we can finally rein in the tyranny. We can still save America, but we are right on the edge. It is imperative we act now before the government grows too powerful to stop. As Ronald Reagan famously said, freedom is never more than one generation from extinction. Why are we here? Why are we in this room right now? Because hundreds of years ago, the Founding Fathers journeyed for months across ravenous seas, fought dire storms, and survived piercing winters to come to the would-be America. Why? They could have easily turned around and gone home to their warm homes back in Europe. They persevered, fought, never giving up so that they could escape the tyranny of the British Parliament. They fought a war against the strongest army in the world, and they won. They had the drive to do that because they wanted life to be better for future generations. We need that drive today. Hundreds of thousands of people have died for freedom, and now we are willingly letting those deaths go to waste. Today we are allowing the same kind of power that our ancestors fought so hard to escape to take over our beautiful America. Why on earth are we allowing it? President John F. Kennedy once said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." It's not about us. It's not about politics. It's about your duty. Your duty to your country, your duty to your constituents, and your duty to the future generations. This is about your duty to make America free and keep it that way. Yes, there are risks, but there's a certain amount of uncertainty in everything. I believe, however, that the benefits far outweigh the danger. Before I turn over the podium, I ask you to consider this. What is the risk of not standing up to the federal government? Just how much more will we let them step on us before we say enough is enough? And by the time we decide to fight back, will it be too late? Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Traver, how old are you?
14 years old, sir.
Okay, well, I got word that you were 15. You're actually younger than we thought, but I applaud you for, at your young age, taking an interest in an issue that is so substantive and significant. And thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Okay, next is Mark Meckler.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee. My name is Mark Meckler, and I am the president of Convention of States Action. We're the organization helping to move this forward nationally. And I'd like to say, first of all, it's unfair to put me behind Natalie Traver because I don't think I can outdo that.
We did that on purpose.
I could tell. I feel a little bit set up, Mr. Chairman. Look, I'm here representing over 43,000 people in the Palmetto State who've stepped up, signed the petition, and said that they would like the state legislature to act in calling a convention of states. I'm beholden to those people. I travel the country. I've been in over 48 states in the last few years, 18 states just in the last few months. And I know what's going on the ground all over this country. People are looking at Washington, D.C., and they're pretty clear that it's out of control. And they're pretty clear that the place they need to look to fix what's going on in D.C. is into their state legislatures. When I first started in politics 11 years ago, I had a general disdain for all politicians. That disdain still applies to Washington, D.C., but having been in so many state legislatures, I know that the heroes of the United States of America sit in these legislatures right here in your own legislature. The founders gave you the authority, and I would argue the moral responsibility, to stand when liberty was at risk. They told you that if things fell apart, if things got difficult, if Washington, D.C. started to ignore the states and the will of the people, they gave you a power that was unique among all members of the government. They gave you the power to call a convention, propose amendments, and actually ratify those amendments, thereby reforming the structure of the United States government. No doubt the vast majority of American people are in favor of term limits. We talk about term limits for federal officials. That's not just Congress. It means staffers, bureaucrats, potentially the federal judiciary. The vast majority of Americans are in favor of some form of balanced budget amendment. They understand from their own finances you can't spend more than you take in forever. They know that we need caps on spending and taxation. Finally, they know that the federal government does far more than it was ever intended to do. The federal government, there is a list of enumerated powers. The courts themselves have allowed the federal government to exceed those powers, and it's time for the states to rein it in. On behalf of the more than 43,000 people here in South Carolina who've signed this petition, I ask that you move this resolution forward. And I would close with this. You're going to hear people use the term con as a pejorative. You're going to hear them talk about a runaway convention. They're going to espouse fear. That's going to be their primary talking point, is that you should be afraid. America has never been a nation of fearful people. This legislature is not full of fearful people, and I would ask that you stand bravely and pass this resolution forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, members of the committee. I'm happy to stand for questions now or later.
Thank you, Mr. Meckler. Any questions?
Yeah. Mr.
Senator
Chair.
from Orangeburg?
Yes, sir. Mr. Meckler, do you not believe in accountability? And when I say accountability being in the form of a vote. As you mentioned, those individuals that have signed on, the accountability piece there is voting those individuals in and voting them out. If it's not working, why would we continue to send someone back who's not voicing the concerns of the constituents in which those individuals who actually sent them to Washington? I'm kind of confused in a sense, because we have the power and the authority to make those changes, and we are not taking that authority and that power.
I just want to make sure that I understand the question. There was a lot packed in there. Number one, you asked, do I not believe in accountability? And my answer is, of course I believe in accountability. I vote in every election. I think everybody should vote in every election, and that is one way that we hold our elected officials accountable. I think the second question is, why do we keep sending people back if we think they're not doing the right thing? And the answer is very apparent to anybody who observes electoral politics in America. The system is designed, especially party and with the main party, that consultant will be forever banned from doing any kind of party politics. They have the donor class on their side because large donors like to be attached to politicians who are sitting in office right now. So we have an incumbency problem that is structural. It has been created over centuries in this country, and the numbers tell us that story. Today, and I would say the main accountability for me is I'm accountable to the American people. 85% of the American people believe in term limits, and it is to them that I am mainly accountable.
And with that being said, over centuries, we have known this problem, and this problem
I'm also concerned about, as other people are, about a runaway convention. And I've talked to you previously about this. You've been here before and you've testified. Help us understand what things we can do in the event this group decides to pass the Convention of States. What can be in it to make sure that it doesn't go beyond the limits of what our delegates would be allowed to do?
Yes, Senator.
On that?
I would start with the process itself as it currently exists, and Representative Taylor detailed it takes 38 states to ratify anything that comes out of convention. I think that's important. It's important to note that's the highest bar in the entire system of the United States of America's governance. So it is a very difficult and high bar, number one. Number two is the states that are passing these resolutions are passing the same resolutions essentially around the three subject matter areas. So that means when 34 states decide what the subject matter of convention is, they've agreed on that in advance. That's a super majority of those going to convention. Each state legislature will choose their own delegates and send them with what are called written commissions.
Hold on just a minute.
Yep.
Let me stop you there.
Yes, sir.
So you're telling us that a number of states have exact documents or exact requirement or petitions for these conventions?
That is correct.
Now, why would we want to have exact? Why wouldn't each state be different?
The reason is something called the law of aggregation. In order to get to convention, we have to have 2/3 of states or 34 states that have passed resolutions that are, and I won't use exact because sometimes states change the preamble language, but need to have operative language that's the same so that we reach that 34 state threshold. Congress determines when that threshold has been met. We know there have been over 400 applications in the history of the United States of America, very different applications, and it is going to take 34 passing the same application to get Congress to recognize that we've reached that threshold.
34.
That's
So
correct.
If we would pass this one, it would be, is ours exact as the other 17?
Yes, sir.
That's being provided now? Okay. All right, and then what else can we do to make sure that the delegates do nothing more than what they're required to do?
So two last things I would bring up. One is just the general law of agency, and forgive me for a little bit of lawyer and you say you want a $100,000 policy, that's the limit of their authority. You've appointed an agent, you've imbued them with authority. If they go out and try to bind you to a $1 million policy, that action is actually null and void. You don't have to argue about it. You're not bound to that policy. That agent didn't have that authority. You have that same authority over the commissioners to the convention. You will tell them what they can and can't do. Any action they would take outside of that would be null and void. And I would add one last thing. Many states have passed some form of what is called a Delegate Limitation Act. And that is an act that's a separate act of the legislature. It's done by legislation generally and not resolution. And that sometimes describes how the delegates will be chosen, but often describes how they will be limited by the legislature, and often imposes civil or criminal penalties for stepping outside of the authority of their commission. So that's something that you can do after the fact to add extra authority.
All right, so if all of these are exactly the same and the delegates are chosen, would they have to be chosen the same way, or would they just have to be commissioned? I believe in the last discussion we had, you were telling us about in the Convention of States and other times, that there was a discussion about what the delegates had to do in the Articles of Confederation and other groups getting together back in the day. And their requirements. You said there was a book of these responsibilities.
Yes, Senator, there is. So first of all, the delegates are chosen by the state legislatures in the manner that the state legislatures deem appropriate. It's a federalist exercise. Every legislature will choose their own delegates in their own way. However, we do have a long history. Courts have ruled on and around Article 5 over 40 times. All of that law and all of the history is contained in a book called The Law of Article 5. That's a treatise on Article 5 written by Professor Rob Nadelson. We have a history of upwards of 41 interstate conventions that have taken place. 11 of them took place before the convention in 1787, another 30 or so post-1787. They've operated generally around the same set of rules. We have the rules for most of those conventions. And so we have a long history and precedent for how these operate. And the courts, as I said, have ruled in and around Article 5 numerous times, and they say that they rely on history and precedent. So we have a long history here, Senator.
Well, our law requires us to look at stare decisis or past precedent.
Correct.
And that's why I'm asking the question. Does this particular bill that we're talking about here, does it have that delegate limitation that you were talking about?
I believe that the resolution that came over from the House has some language in it that involves delegate limitation. My recommendation would be that you have a standalone piece of legislation that contains delegate limitation and is more thorough if that's something that the legislature is interested in.
Thank you.
And we do have delegate limitation legislation in our possession that we will deal with later. And Senator from Richland, McLeod, you have a question. I see your hand raised on Zoom.
I do. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I just wanted to share with Mr. Meckler, is it? Okay, and I do have a question. I just want to share with you that I am an avid proponent of term limits. In fact, I've introduced bills in the State House, I think every time we've been able to introduce bills for state term limits. Of course, they haven't gone anywhere, but I've also introduced bills for a biennial budget. I do have concerns about this bill, or these bills rather, and I wanted to ask, and I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Mr. Meckler, or it may be more appropriate for our chair, Senator Campson, if we have heard from any constitutional experts, because I'd be interested in doing that if we have not. Senator Campson, that may be a more appropriate question for you.
Well, as far as constitutional expert to address which question, which issue, because
well, I'd just like to hear from I'm sorry?
No, keep going, I'm sorry, but which issue in particular? Do you have a particular issue?
Well, there are a number of issues, that have already been raised this morning, like the runaway convention, the delegates, how all of this works. I'd just like to hear from some of the constitutional experts.
Well, I
Can
could
we
tell
do
you,
that?
because I've had a bit of a journey on this issue. I originally was opposed to it and really studied myself to be supportive of it as long as it's done in a very cautious way, for a couple of reasons. And one concern was the runaway convention issue. And I concluded largely after reading Pauline Meyer's book, Ratification, which is a very insightful book on the ratification process at the states. And the states did it by convention. And I think Mr. Meckler mentioned this earlier in his comments, that conventions were ad hoc meetings or associations that are created for a single purpose, and then once that purpose is accomplished, is disbanded. And we saw there's a very strong historical record about the conventions in the states debating whether they would ratify the U.S. Constitution. They did it by state convention, and those conventions were not runaway conventions. They did their job, and then it ceased to exist. And so, to the extent you would have any judicial proceeding in which this was an issue, there is a robust history in our history in the ratification of the federal Constitution whereby runaway conventions, I think a court would clearly conclude that the convention the framers envisioned in Article 5 is a convention that would be stick to the issue that it is commissioned and created for, because we do have a rich history of that. Because I originally was very concerned about that, largely because I think that that our political dynamics are really a function of culture and worldview that the people have. And I think the framers had and it largely comes, when it comes to government, to your view of human nature. And I think the framers had it right. They didn't trust human beings with concentrated political power, did everything they could to diffuse that power. And you see it in Article 5. It takes 3/4 of the states to ratify any product of a convention of states. And so, but yet they gave the power to amend to both the states and the federal government. But as a state lawmaker, I am reticent to basically unilaterally disarm when it comes to one of the powers they gave us to push back against the federal government. And this is an example of one of those powers. And the 3/4 ratification threshold is very high, and that gives me some comfort, because if we just created a constitution de novo in this culture, I agree with Scalia in the sense that this is the wrong century to do it, because this century has abandoned the principles. Their view is really essentially the Judeo-Christian view of human nature, that man's fallen, sinful, capable of great evil, but made in God's image, capable of good, so he needs guardrails. And you have institutions and values to promote the good and restrain the evil, and you see the framers having that same vision. And in fact, Madison stated it better than anyone in Federalist 51 when he said he's defending the separation of powers doctrine, explaining it, and he said, political ambition of one branch needs to counterbalance the political ambition of the other. And then he said this, his greatest quote, what is government but the greatest of all reflections upon human nature? If all men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, no restraint on government would be necessary. But in creating a government of men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. First, you must empower the government to restrain the governed, and secondly, you must compel it to restrain itself. And this is one of those provisions that enabled the states to restrain it. And the Bill of Rights was the separation of powers, federalism, the 9th and 10th Amendment, all those things the framers put in the Constitution to restrain political power because, and I like to say the one message that echoes through the ages is this: we don't trust human beings with concentrated political power. And they were right, thank goodness. But this is one of those devices. So all that history, I think, constitutionally, to me, I've concluded for those reasons and others. I'm going to stop talking now, but for now anyway. But all those reasons and others is why I really studied myself from one position to the next, to another.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate that. I was referring to a legal expert.
Well, I'm a lawyer.
Are we?
I'm a lawyer who's studied this for my whole adult life, so.
Right.
But you're not going to certify me as an expert, I guess, Senator. So.
No, not at this juncture. But are we planning to hear from any unbiased constitutional experts?
Senator, if I might. I myself, Senator, am a lawyer as well. I spent the last 9 years of my life dedicated to the study of this single issue. I'm always loath to describe myself as an expert in anything because my wife might laugh at me. But in this subject matter area, I would consider myself an expert. I've testified literally hundreds of times in legislatures, bodies like this before very smart senators like you. I'm happy to answer any of your questions, and I've read all the literature on the subject matter. And again, I do understand it from a legal perspective, having been a lawyer for many decades.
Okay, I appreciate that. I am genuinely looking to hear from someone who is not, who's independent and unbiased on this particular issue.
Yeah, I would argue you'll be hard-pressed to find somebody who's independent and unbiased. There are very strong opinions on this issue from people all over the country. Everybody has a perspective, so I don't believe that the unbiased, unvarnished opinion actually exists.
Are you saying that anyone who spent time studying this comes down on one side or the other? They're never generally not neutral. They're just coming down on one side or the other.
That is correct, Mr.
That's
Chairman.
probably true. Senator, so we don't have anyone we can present. There are a lot of books we could read, but any further questions for Mr. Meckler?
Well, I had some constitutional law professors at the University of South Carolina. I'd be willing to reach out to them. I just want to hear some. I apologize. I'm getting a call. I just want to hear from some folks who are not. Sorry. What'd you say? Okay. I just want to hear from some legal constitutional experts. I get that you, Mr. Meckler, and Senator Campson consider yourselves constitutional experts on this particular issue. I'd like to hear from some others as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Next, David, we have someone online, David Walker, and I'm going to have to leave, but we're going to keep going until 1 o'clock, and we have to adjourn at 1 o'clock, but I'm going to be gone until 1 o'clock, and we will reconvene 30 minutes after adjournment if we're not done by 1, which it appears we won't be. So thank you.
All we need to do is break down out here.
So I turn it over to Senator Rice.
Okay. Mr. Walker, are you online?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Dave Walker. I'm testifying on behalf of myself. I'm a political independent, a Reagan presidential appointee, a Bush 41 presidential appointee, and a Clinton presidential appointee. I've been Comptroller General of the United States, a public trustee for Social Security and Medicare, and I'm currently on the Defense Business Board. I submitted written testimony in advance supporting S-141, S-887, and S-106. I support a single-issue constitutional convention as allowed for under Article 5. The 141 calls for that. It's my understanding that this subcommittee passed S-141 last year. S-887 is a delegate limitation bill, which was referred to in the previous by Mr. Meckler. Strongly recommend that you pass that legislation as a safeguard against the runaway. And S-106 is a resolution that calls on the Congress to call for a single issue constitutional convention based upon activity that has taken place over the years and starting in 1979. Opponents of a convention use unwarranted scare tactics and unsupported legal arguments to oppose any convention of states for any subject matter. Their actions serve to effectively condone the irresponsible actions of the federal government and the undercutting of the power of states under the Constitution. The opponent's primary argument is that any convention would be a runaway. There are a number of safeguards in place to prevent this, which I note in my testimony, and S-887 would be a supplemental safeguard. Opponents also argue that plenary applications should not count. They provide no legal basis for their argument and do not acknowledge that the state of New Jersey, when they rescinded their application in 2021, the New Jersey Senate specifically noted that plenary applications do count. In addition, Mr. Meckler referred to Dr. Rob Nadelson, who is an acknowledged Article 5 constitutional scholar, who outlined in a 2018 legal article the legal basis for counting plenary applications and noting which ones that he felt should count. His article effectively affirms that the 34-state requirement for a single-issue fiscal responsibility amendment has been met several times in the past, starting in 1979. Obviously, South Carolina reaffirming your interest in this is of critical importance and would send a further signal that it's time for Congress to act. I cannot overstate the importance of reining in the irresponsible, unethical, and immoral fiscal path that we are on. States have a duty to stop this by asserting their rights under Article 5 of the Constitution. Washington is out of touch. It is out of control. It will not take the necessary steps to restore fiscal sanity and sustainability unless it is forced to do so. One way to do it is through an Article 5 limited convention. If pressure gets too great, then Congress may decide to do it itself through the old-fashioned way, through proposing through 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate amendment. In the end, the states will decide. It takes 3/4 of the states to be able to make any proposed amendment or amendments become law. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm actually out in the middle of nowhere in the process of driving from Virginia to Florida. And let me say at the end, I got married in Beaufort, South Carolina 50 years ago. And my wife and I both have patriots who fought the American Revolution from South Carolina, at least one of which who died in the American Revolution. This is critically important for our country. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Are there any questions from any of the members? I don't think we have any questions. Thank you for your testimony. Have a good trip.
Thank you. Take care.
Next would be Roy Moore. David, is it Nance? I believe. Is David Nance here? Okay, you're next online. You're on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm E. Ray Moore. I've served 45 years in pastoral ministry, 30 years in the Army Reserve, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. And our family's had a long history of public policy and political involvement. My brother served for years on Strom Thurmond's staff as his top aide, and then worked at the Heritage Foundation for a time. And so we've had a long history of involvement, and I am opposed to 3205. And I'd ask you to not pass it. Here's some of my thinking. First of all, I want to say that the people here who are in support of that, many of the complaints and the reasons that they are for this are legitimate complaints. I would share some of them. I agree that the federal government is really out of control in many ways. But if you think voting for an application asking Congress to call a limited convention on Article 5, you might be mistaken. And of course, on our side, we don't know what will come out on the other side. We're just very apprehensive and concerned about it, and we've been accused of fear-mongering, but frankly, I am fearful of what might be produced. I think the Constitution as stands is a firewall against any encroachments, and it's not being adhered to, it's not being respected. What it gives us is equity or a freedom for both sides. It's a document that gives Democrats, Republicans, independents, liberals, and conservatives a level playing field. And we might be tampering with that. According to Article 5, Congress shall call a convention proposing amendments upon the application of 2/3 of the states. It is up to Congress to decide when 34 states, I believe it's the number, it might be 38, have a valid application. Nothing in the article says the application needs to be the same or similar and can be limited. And that's the danger. When the Constitutional Convention met in 1787, they threw out the Articles of Confederation. That was our Constitution prior to that. And they had a new ratification system. They said only 9 states of the 13 need to ratify, not 13, as was the Articles of Confederation. So they threw it out. Now, we got lucky. They were sound thinkers and great thinkers, and we got a good document in 1787. Furthermore, the Congress calls an Article 5 convention. The convention can do whatever they want, including proposing a new constitution. Now, I'm not necessarily expecting that, but the danger is there. We don't want to tamper with the Constitution. Don't fix the Constitution if it's not broken. It's more fundamental problems in our culture, and Senator Campson called attention to that. This is a bad time to be tampering with the Constitution when we're in turmoil and that sort of thing. So thank you for allowing me to speak. Want to say one, if I have a minute more, on term limits. We have term limits right now, and it's called an election. And South Carolina for years had Senator Thurmond and Senator Hollins, and they had high seniority. And they gave our small state with 4 million people a lot more political power. And both of them, we had a major senator, a senior senator in either party. So whoever was in the White House, South Carolina was taken care of. And we'd had term limits, we'd have been much weaker as a state. So I think term limits is a mistake, and we can take care of it anytime we want with an election.
Thank you. Do any committee members have any questions? No, I do not see any questions. Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. Mr. Nance,
And the next
Joan Brown, I believe it is next. Okay, I'll back up to that. It got skipped over. Thank you for bringing that to attention. All right, you'll be next then. Mr. Nance, is that right?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name's David Nance. I have my wife in the back. And
Mr. Nance, we are going to try to get through as many as we can. So
right.
I will, when I put my hand up, I'll let you know
appreciate
the
that.
time is close.
So just as the previous gentleman mentioned, that I actually share many of the same grievances, term limits, fiscal responsibility and things like that. We can't spend money that we don't have coming in, and we should not be printing money and things like that on the federal level, and we absolutely have to bring that in. But as the gentleman's prior to me said, we do have the mechanisms to restrain that. I was reading the Constitution the other day, and the limitations are very put in very clearly, and there's only so many things that the federal government are allowed to do. Almost any almost anything that you see as far as the alphabet agencies, all these different things, they've been put into place, but there's very specific things that the government can do, and we need to, as a collective body, as states, come together and petition our congressmen that we have. And like he said, we can vote them out of office. I agree that we need to, the money, for example, that the present legislatures have, or the present representatives have, what other organizations that are represented here also have a lot of money behind them? The opposition to this, I don't think, has a great deal amount of money. I could be wrong, but like if I were to go and try to run for election or run for office, I'm going to be doing it out of my bank account, my savings account, and so that's why we come up here to petition our congressmen, petition to our legislators. I met with Wes Clymer yesterday and spoke with him, and that is a great opportunity, a great responsibility that we all need to take upon ourselves to act in our citizenry, our capacity as citizens. I have three problems. Congress can appoint whoever they choose. Just like the man said before, there is no rules in the Article 5, okay? Three constitutions are actually currently already written, ready to be proposed, and that comes from, I believe it's the Constitution Project, constitutionproject.org or Constitution Drafting Project. And also, there's already precedent, just like that's already been brought up. The Articles of Confederation absolutely changed it. Not only did they not abide by whatever rules that they had, they completely changed the rules for ratification, as has already been spoken of. So the Article 5 can simply be nullified. When the Article 5 convention takes place, you're literally setting out a clear table, like a blank slate, and you can say, all right, let's put anything we want to on that table, and that is going to be that it is absolutely like they can do anything they want. As Scalia said, do we really? There's already been a precedent for that, as far as the Second Amendment, for example. Let me read you what one of the.
You got to hurry because your time's up. I've given you a lot more time than you should have had.
This is Robbie George. Neither the states nor the United States shall make or enforce any law infringing the right to keep and bear arms of the sort ordinarily used for self-defense or recreational purposes, provided that states in the United States and places subject to the general regulatory authority may enact and enforce reasonable regulations on the bearing of arms and keeping of arms. That makes it anybody that they deem not worthy to have guns will not have guns. That is already proposed in a constitution that's already on the table, waiting for this constitutional convention.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Thank you, Mr. Nance. Ms. Irwin, is that right?
Yes, thank you, sir. My name is Sherry Irwin. I'm opposed to any and all amendments that you call for an Article 5 constitutional convention. Doesn't matter what you propose ahead of time. This has all been made up recently to try to get patriots to go along with having a convention. Why was it put in Article 5? It was put in Article 5 because the Anti-Federalists wanted it put in there. They demanded it be put in there because they wanted to call a new constitution to throw out our current constitution. The Federalists relented and said, all right, we'll let them do it, because whether it's in Article 5 or not, the people have a right to call for a convention. And once called, they have a right to do whatever they want and throw out our current Constitution. Within a year, the Anti-Federalists were campaigning for a new Constitution. The Federalists campaigned vigorously against it. Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton campaigned vigorously against it, which is ironic because they were instrumental in throwing out the Articles of Confederation, starting over. It took 100% to do anything to the Articles. They ignored that, changed the threshold. There's a new threshold on one of the new constitutions, and you guys won't even exist. I'll get to that in a second. Federalist 48 and Federalist 49 by Madison, he states this is not the way to reign in the federal government because the Congress can appoint themselves as delegates. It says in Article 5, they may decide on the mode of ratification. That's not a suggestion. It's like when you tell somebody they may sit down or they may leave, you're politely telling them, sit down. When they say Congress may decide on the mode of ratification, it means Congress decides on the mode. all you can do is apply for the convention. It doesn't matter about your amendments. And term limits is a lame duck amendment anyway. It's the most dangerous time in Congress when they don't have to face the electorate. Founding fathers got rid of term limits for a reason. And that board member, Robbie George, that they've already told you he's gutted the Second Amendment. He's also served on the National Constitutional Center's Constitution Drafting Project. The National Constitution Center is like a quasi-official branch of the federal government. They've got 3 constitutions ready to go. And this guy works for a convention of states. And it says in the Constitution of a New States America that under the new state's constitution, the states are dissolved and replaced by regional governments, which is already happening now. You guys are helping right now with the Council of Governments that you were funding yesterday. That's all from the UN. All this is about unelected bureaucrats taking our voices away. And the land trust that you guys are now doing is a very clever way of taking people's private property. We have it. You've got the power now, Article 6. You guys proved last year that you wouldn't stand with us with the vaccine mandates. That was the ultimate test for you. I'm unemployed now because I refused to comply with that tyranny. We have a right to pick what goes in our body, and you guys didn't stand up for us. And now you want to have a constitutional convention? And by the way, the Convention of States up until 10 years ago called it a constitutional convention, but their newspeak guy said, we better call it a convention of states. In the 70s.
Wrap it up,
well,
please.
all right. As far as constitutional scholars, for the lady that is on the phone, look up Robert Brown and Joanna Martin, Article 5, and look up their videos. Unfortunately, he can't come and speak at the same time as Mark Meckler because Mark Meckler won't face him. Mark Meckler actually said in an interview that Article 5 will not solve the problem. And in that same interview, he said he didn't trust the state legislatures either.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? I'd really like to answer a few questions.
Any questions? No.
Did you guys all read my article that I gave you yesterday? It's all in black and white about these new constitutions and the guy sitting on a convention of state boards. I took it to your offices. I'll be happy to, I've got more copies here if you guys would like one.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So would you like to answer a question?
No, I don't think we have any questions.
Chairman, I do
We
have
have a
one.
question from
Yes.
Senator Stevens.
Ms. Irving, right?
Ms. Irwin.
Okay. As I look at the ratification of the convention or the rules that will drive the convention, I'm puzzled as to how states would be considered. Would it be a one person, one state vote, or would it be a populist vote? And the thing that grabs my attention is that the majority of the states have a very small population. And those states would be basically the ones that would drive the convention in a sense, if it comes down to that. What is your opinion about that, if it should happen?
There's talk of making it like the Electoral College, which means our state would hardly have any voice. The truth of the matter is the delegates in convention would make up the rules. Our founding fathers were sent with, ahead of time, said this is all you can do. And our founding fathers, who were godly men, ignored their mandate and threw everything out, locked the doors at the convention, and said, we are writing a new constitution, we're going to lower the threshold. And thank God they were godly men, we got a beautiful constitution. We have socialist constitutions, I just told you about one. A guy on the Convention of State Board is helping to write these, one of these. And it's when delegates, once they're in convention, they will be the most powerful people in the country. And you can't stop them. You're not going to know what they're talking about. Anything can happen. Our founding fathers did it. They set the precedent. And they, trust me, they are made up this whole business about amendments ahead of time to get patriots like you guys to go along with this, because in the 70s, they were honest. They were wanting a new convention to throw out our Constitution, and it wasn't working. So they made up this, hey, let's come up with these amendments. Well, let's talk about these amendments for a second. Term limits is a lame duck amendment. The most dangerous time in Congress is the lame duck session when they don't have to face the electorate again. That's why our founding fathers got rid of term limits in the Articles of Confederation. Balanced budget amendment sounds terrific, except you're now giving them the power to raise our taxes every year. They don't even have to vote to raise our taxes if they got to balance the budget. We all agree we got to stop spending like this, but they can just raise our taxes every year. I cannot stress how serious this is, guys. This is your chance to save our country by voting no. And I'm telling you, we're going to lose everything if a convention is called.
Are you finished?
Thank you, Ms. Irvin.
Senator McLeod had a question for you.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Senator, are you all there?
I do, yes. I am headed to the State House, so
We've
don't
got,
have video,
let me say
I
this.
did want to ask.
We've got about 10 more minutes, and we're going to have to.
I'll be quick.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, I have not had an opportunity yet to review the materials that you've given us, but I did want to ask, I think I heard you allude to the fact that there basically is no such thing as a limited convention. Is that what I understand?
That is correct. If you read Article 5.
Like you either have a convention or you don't.
Right, in Article 5, the convention method says states may apply for a convention, and upon, 3/4 of the states, they meet. A convention will be called for proposing amendments. It does not say for voting on amendments decided ahead of time. It says for proposing amendments, and of course, again, the entire Constitution can be thrown out because the delegates do have the authority and power, which is stated in the Declaration of Independence.
So basically, this could be a cancel our Constitution type of convention.
I'm sorry?
I said, so basically, we are debating about whether this could be a cancel our Constitution type of convention.
They do have constitutions ready to go, and they've made up this, you can propose amendments ahead of time to get wonderful patriots to go along with it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming
Thank
up.
you.
I'm going to try to move as quick as I can because we've got about 20 people signed up. There's no way we're going to get everybody in. Right now, we've got about 10 minutes left. I believe, is it Joan Brown? Thank you. I appreciate your speech. Ted Sims. I don't, what is that? Drews?
Michael Drews.
Michael Drews. Is Michael Drews here? Not speaking? Okay, thank you. David, I believe Chapman. Is that right? Is that P-E-R? Pernan. John Pernan. Perna.
How you spell that?
P-E-R-N-A.
Most people recognize that we live in a time where there's widespread corruption. While assertions of foreign manipulation and rigged elections are everywhere, there seems to be a widespread illusion that a constitutional convention would be completely honest. We should understand that it would be much easier to rig one constitutional convention than to rig an entire election. There is only one precedent for a constitutional convention. The last time we had a constitutional convention was 1787, when we got the Constitution that we have now. There will always be only one precedent for a constitutional convention because the act of calling a constitutional convention brings about an end to one nation and the beginning of a new nation. Just as the Constitutional Convention that we had in 1789 was the end of the Confederation of the 13 sovereign states and the beginning of the United States of America, a new Constitutional Convention will be an end of the United States of America and the beginning of some other country. The claim that we are protected by the need for ratification of 3/4 of the states is also frivolous. What if the new Constitution does not say that? What if, once again, they change the rules for ratification? That Constitutional Convention of 1787 that was convened to make some small changes in the Articles of Confederation. Instead, we got a new Constitution. We were lucky that time. Those were that Constitutional Convention were the leaders of a freedom movement who had just defeated tyranny. Who would be the delegates of the new Constitutional Convention today? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison not going to be there. How many states today would ratify a constitution for the Union of Soviet Socialist America? There is a claim that we would be safe because the current Constitution, the ratification would be required by 3/4 of the state. What if the new Constitution doesn't say that? The last time we had a Constitutional Convention, one of the first things they did was change the rules for ratification that were in place under the Articles of Confederation. That is why the ratification now requires 3/4 of the state. It was 100% under the Articles of Confederation. So there's only one precedent that we have for a Constitutional Convention. They initially met to make a few limited changes in the Articles of Confederation. They threw out the Articles of Confederation, started over. That included changing the rules for ratification. And now we are told that the only thing that has ever happened cannot happen. If you read Article 5 and see that Congress has the power to determine the mode of ratification, what stops Congress from deciding that they themselves are the mode of ratification? We are told that we're going to rein in on the federal government because they're going to be required by law to do whatever they want. Can you consistently pass?
Your time's up, but
Yeah.
Go ahead and wrap up if you can.
Okay. Well, can you consistently pass legislation right now that protects us from unconstitutional usurpation? What will stop them from, again, throwing out the whole thing and changing the rules for ratification? I'll just let it. I'd like to come back.
Thank you. Is there anybody have any questions? Senator McLeod, your hand is up, or you may have just left it up. She can't. I don't think she can hear.
Sorry
me.
about that. No, I don't have a question.
Okay.
Let me
Thank
lower
you.
it.
All
Sorry.
right. Thank you. All right. Thank you. I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Let's see. Sharon Clark. I've got time for you and maybe one more. So, Tanya.
Can you hear me?
Tanya Eddings, yeah, is behind. I don't know if she's wanting to. But go ahead.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Just
Bring this down a little.
yeah, come on down a little more with it.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Many proponents of Article 5 Convention claim that it can be limited to just the stated goals, such as limitation of congressional spending and terms limitations. However, nothing, as you've heard, not Congress, nor the administration, the state legislatures, or even the Supreme Court, nothing is more powerful than a constitutional convention once it is convened. Constitutional scholars insist that calling a constitutional convention could indeed lead to a runaway convention that could reverse many of the constitutional limitations on government powers, thereby giving the federal government almost total control. Former Supreme Court Justice Warren Burger stated, "There is no effective way to limit or muzzle the actions of a constitutional convention after a convention is convened. It will be too late to stop the convention if we don't like its agenda." Any amendment in a convention will need broad support to pass. Concessions will have to be made. The resulting document will not be an improvement from what we have now. Today, we see extremists from all sides pushing for fundamentally transforming the nation into something unrecognizable. They would love a convention with the potential to do just that. it's been documented that COS Board of Advisors member Robert George has written a replacement constitution that guts fundamental rights, such as the Second Amendment. They've already written a constitution, a replacement constitution, and they're telling you that a convention can be limited to just one or two issues. Remember, once an application for a convention leaves our legislature, it is out of your hands completely. Congress takes control of calling a convention, and you can be assured it will be set up to their liking.
Okay, thank you. Are you about wrapped up?
Just about.
Right.
This could mean a scrapped constitution and possibly a new government. Here again, I urge you not to pass these resolutions. We are, thank you very much.
Okay, any questions from the committee?
Yes, Ms. Clark.
Yes.
Senator Stevens.
Oh, thank you for coming. I just wanted to share something with you, Ms. Clark, and ask your opinion. Economist Richard Cogan wrote some years ago, and I'm gonna read you just what he wrote. A balanced budget amendment, if ratified by the Constitutional Convention, would threaten significant economic and would do significant economic harm. It would also raise significant problems for the operation of Social Security and certain other key federal functions. In your compilation of information on your view, what do you think about, what are your opinions about what I just read?
Well, I can tell you that Congress is ignoring the Constitution. It's not the Constitution that's broken, it's Congress. And that needs to be handled by the voters.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Tanya Eddings, is that right? I'm gonna say this, we've got less than 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll be brief.
And I don't mind, we're gonna come back.
Okay.
So if you'd rather wait till we come back, or if you can go ahead and do it.
No, sir, I can be brief. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Honorable Senators, for having me today. I'm a resident of Sumter County, and I'm glad everyone has shown up and that we're all passionate about the subject. The one thing that is unifying us is that we agree that the federal government has overreached, and that's a start, and I love that. So I'm very positive about that particular point. Senator McLeod asked for constitutional experts, and as Ms. Clark stated beforehand, Chief Justice Warren Burger from the Supreme Court has in fact said that there is a risk of a runaway convention, and the convention could make its own rules and set its own agenda. So even though we may be well-intentioned as South Carolinians in having a delegate and passing these bills and moving forward, and we have a delegate that is well-intentioned, honorable, has a good moral standard, that agrees to go and represent us in the way that we deem necessary, it's open-ended. It's Pandora's box. And you can't put it back in. That really is very frightening to me. And that's it's not my opinion, that's from the Supreme Court Justice. I have also read and seen a video where Antonin Scalia, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, has also cautioned against a runaway convention. And that's what we have to do. I bet everybody in this room has car insurance. You have risk, you have insurance. We have a risk of losing our Constitution, and we have very little insurance. We have what we can do in this body as the General Assembly and the Senate and the House, but we don't have that. Once that delegate is elected, it is open-ended when they get to the convention. And that is chilling to me. So I also want to point out, if Congress said, okay, convention, use Robert's Rules of Order, it only takes 2 people to make a motion to change the agenda, a person to second it in the discussion, and then it's a free-for-all. we have no guarantee that the person will vote in fact. Okay, and then also, I wanted to mention that I don't trust Congress. The $1 trillion infrastructure bill that was passed, that vote did not happen until 11:45 on a Friday night. What do we think is going to happen if they're in charge of the rules for the Convention of States, the Constitutional Convention? I don't trust them as they are. Do I trust them to create the rules? Are you kidding me? I just don't understand that at all. I see that we all agree that there's a problem, but I don't agree with this avenue. And I'm not saying that it is completely out there, but I would say this is a 1%. Let's look at it when 99% of all the other avenues that we can change what is going on, like our vote. Let's use 99% of that. Let's use the other avenues before we consider, this should be our last option, not our first option.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we are going to recede until 30 minutes after adjournment of the Senate. I have no idea what we're, from a time frame, but probably less than 2 hours in session is my guess. So, thank everybody for coming out, and we will continue hearing testimony after we get back.
Resolution number 2. 2/3 vote is required. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown, excused. Burkhart. Burt. Burt. Clausen. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. LeBeau. McGuire. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza, Rodriguez Williams, Romero Martinez, Roscoe, Schwartz, Sherwood, Simpson, Summers, Stith, Stivar, Sweeney, Walters, Washit, Western, Wharf, Williams, aye. Wilson, Winter, Yen, Zawanitzer, Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 21 aye, 37 no, 1 excused, 1 absent. That was my fault.
Chief Clerk, let's change that absent to excused. That I should have called that out. My apologies. So members, by your vote, House Joint Resolution number 2 has not been introduced. We do thank the folks for outcome, but we thank you for being here and observing it. Thank you for the young one right there, the young person right there, and just watching this process. Several young people up there. Yeah, let's welcome them. That's what we're working for, folks. That's what we're working for. The future of our nation, the future of Wyoming. All right, members, once again, as we're taking roll call, please.
All right, you've been watching a hearing of the Convention of States resolution in South Carolina in a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee. They are not finished today. They're going to go to a floor session, and then they'll come back to finish the hearing and make a final vote here probably later this afternoon. What we showed you at the end there was a vote actually by the Wyoming legislature on whether to consider the Convention of States resolution this year because they're in a budget-only session. And so that vote looks like that failed. So we will be back in Wyoming next year for their regular session. So it was a budget-only session in Wyoming, so it's kind of an outside shot, as I understand it, to get it considered this year, but we'll be back in Wyoming next year. Tune in later this afternoon as we will revisit that South Carolina Senate Subcommittee and hope for a successful vote there. We are already halfway home in South Carolina, so we needed to just go through the Senate, and then we'll be at state number 18, Lord willing.